Good morning again to those of you who are sticking with us here for the day and afresh for those who've come in. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, who is David Sullivan, who's visiting us from Boulder in Colorado, the United States of America. And he is the Executive Director of the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership. And he is the, in fact, founding Executive Director. And this was a first-of-its-kind initiative aimed at promoting a safer and more trustworthy internet. He's an experienced human rights and technology policy practitioner, and he brings together the unlikely allies to solve global challenges relating to rights, security, and democracy in the digital age. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Ian. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon and good evening to folks who may be joining us online. It's a real pleasure to be here. This morning, I'm going to present the work of our partnership, iterating on best practices for trust and safety, including our work on age assurance. And what I really want to try to point to is why approaches to age assurance are going to be best grounded in a broader organizational commitment to transparency and accountability when it comes to trust and safety online. And then talk about the guiding principles and best practices we've developed for trust and safety, how we're engaging in standards processes in this space, and our kind of thoughts on multi-stakeholder dialogue to provide, I think, practical and nuanced ways forward when it comes to these complicated issues. Just a few words first about the Digital Trust and Safety Partnership. We bring together providers of all different types of digital products and services around a shared commitment to developing, using, and promoting best practices for trust and safety, and that will ultimately be reviewed through assessments, both internal assessments and ultimately third-party independent assessments. And here, I think we're really inspired by how other functions within the technology sector have matured and professionalized over time. And so in particular, if you look at something like information security, where things like ISO standards happening in this building today and other frameworks have allowed organizations to mature how they handle complicated risks. We want to do the same in the sort of space of user-generated content and conduct. And so here's a snapshot of our current partners. As you can see, these are companies providing very different digital products and services with different business models and different types of risks. And as you can see also there, we have members, partner companies with different levels of exposure to young people, whether it is providers of gaming services or gaming adjacent services who are working directly with young people and offering their services to children, to very much 18 and over services, whether that's online dating at Match Group or other services. And so companies are coming at this challenge of age assurance from very different perspectives. How we align is around something called the DTSP Best Practices Framework. And so we've really articulated 5 overarching commitments, which we think are the sort of necessary steps that organizations who are serious about trust and safety should be taking that really mirror the product development life cycle. So this is about trust and safety in product development and safety by design. It's about governance, the rules, the community guidelines, the terms of service that set the rules for how users use these services, how one enforces those rules, how one improves over time, and then transparency with the public and with other stakeholders. And so these are the necessary steps we think that companies should be using to uphold human rights, maintain and preserve the value of these digital products and services, and also be transparent and accountable. So underneath these 5 overarching commitments, we have articulated an inventory of 35 specific best practices. And the idea here is that not all of these practices are going to be appropriate for all providers of digital products and services. And instead, it's really up to the company to choose what are the practices that are going to most effectively address their particular content and conduct related risks. So our organization is not the place that is developing the sort of specific practices to deal with particular types of harms, whether that's something like issues around CSAM and grooming, terrorism and extremism, abuse and bullying, self-harm. All of those are different types of risks that companies can use this broader framework to address. And this is a non-exclusive list of best practices as well. It may be that companies have other practices that they can use to fulfill those 5 overarching commitments. And I'll talk a little bit later about the best practices we've identified when it comes to age assurance. Okay, so I want to talk just briefly about our approach to assessment and evaluation before then getting into our sort of age assurance specific work, because I think grounding the conversation about best practices is also about understanding how we evaluate the use of these practices and how that can evolve going forward. So after our partnership formed in 2021, we developed a methodology for how companies can assess the implementation of these practices called the SAFE framework. We published a public-facing version of that back in December 2021. And then in 2022, our founding companies undertook initial self-assessments using this methodology. And we issued a public report that sort of aggregated insights and data from those assessments. And I want to just briefly share the sort of top-level results from that. So I'm not going to get into the details of the assessment methodology, but I'm happy to talk with anybody who's interested more about it. But essentially, companies did these internal assessments, and then we developed a common maturity rating scale. So all the companies were able to assign levels of maturity to the practices they were using for trust and safety, and on a sort of 1 to 5 scale, from ad hoc practices that are sort of incomplete or non-existent, all the way to sort of optimized practices informed by continuous innovation when it comes to both technology and new ideas. And so we aggregated the results, again, from 10 different companies' assessments and looked at this, and looking across our 5 overarching commitments, we found that most of these were at the overall level of defined, a sort of 3 out of 5, which indicates, some level of maturity, but a lot of room for improvement. With product improvement sort of notably lagging behind a little bit at the repeatable level. But as you can see from those blue arrows, a wide range in terms of where companies were seeing themselves on this journey towards maturity when it comes to trust and safety. When we looked at what practices companies were using that were most mature, we found this was often, but not entirely, things that we considered to be kind of core content moderation practices. It's about having a team responsible for creating and updating the policies or community guidelines for what's acceptable for a service, and enforcing those guidelines using a combination of people and process and technology. Where we found processes to be least mature overall tended to be, but again, not exclusively, best practices that related to getting user input and external collaboration. And I think when we looked at this, what we saw was that I think within technology companies, the trust and safety teams responsible for this kind of work had previously not had the kind of external engagement outside of their companies that we're all benefiting from at a conference like this one all this week. That's changed a lot. It's changed even more since we did these assessments, I think, as trust and safety sort of comes out of the shadows and engages with other stakeholders as part of a number of different initiatives. And I think we would see a lot more maturity across a lot of these practices if we did this exercise today, both as companies continue to improve and as various regulatory requirements come into play. But this is, I think, a kind of snapshot and a baseline that can be used to say, okay, where on the whole did companies see themselves as more or less mature on trust and safety as a whole, and how can we use that to see where there's investments and improvement going forward. So age assurance, topic of the day and of the week. Here, I think in recent years, our partner companies have all been grappling with how to approach this issue of ensuring age-appropriate experiences online, whether that's keeping young people away from products and experiences intended for adults, or trying to provide those experiences appropriate to young people at given ages. And I think that while there's obviously no shortage of interest in this issue as reflected by this conference we're at, that while there's many innovative providers of age assurance solutions who've been out there and part of the public debate, no shortage of interest from policymakers and regulators and a lot of discussion. And of course, individual companies, as they talk about what they are thinking about and what they're doing in the space, get a lot of attention. But I do think there was a collective view that the position of the providers of digital products and services on what age assurance means, what it looks like, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, had been missing, and we wanted to fill that gap. So a year ago, in April 2024, we convened a working group consisting of members of many, but not all, of our partner companies. As you can imagine, we have worked with some companies, maybe LinkedIn, for example, that have a little less kind of relevance to age assurance compared to some of our others. And we spent about 6 months working through a series of objectives in terms of trying to summarize current and proposed approaches to age assurance, looking at definitions for both age assurance and age verification, looking at the differences in how different products, different business models and different user bases are looking at these issues, exploring the standard space, and ultimately trying to identify what we wound up calling guiding principles and best practices for age assurance. And we published a report on this in September of last year, which is on our homepage, dtspartnership.org. Encourage folks to take a look at it. I've got a copy here that I'm happy to share afterwards. So first, just on methods, and I'll be brief here because I think I've seen some version of this slide in nearly every presentation I've been in at this conference so far. But, and I think of no surprise to the folks in this room, but I think we really were able to achieve industry consensus among our partners as, that age assurance is the umbrella term here, incorporating age verification, age estimation, and self-declaration. And we sort of identified methods that were being used in those categories, whether it's identity document verification or parental consent or parental verification under the verification piece, and then under age estimation, everything from capacity testing to inference based on data analysis to social vouching to physical age estimation, including, of course, facial estimation. And we, of course, also noted that self-declaration remains a major part of the landscape here, but one that our partners were increasingly using in combination with other methods as part of what we call layered enforcement, which I'll speak about briefly in a moment. So the other thing, which again is of no surprise, I think, to the folks in this room, is that all of these different methods entail different sorts of trade-offs. So, whether that is more accurate methods entailing some additional data that could create challenges in terms of privacy and data protection, or methods that then pose challenges in terms of accessibility and inclusion. I think I've seen and been learning from all of the participants in this conference, whether it's coming from industry, coming from regulators, coming from technical experts, about different approaches to try to overcome some of these trade-offs. But I think we can't wish them away. Instead, we got to face up to them, recognize that there's going to be different approaches and that this is going to vary based on how different products are approaching these issues, and really try to contend with these trade-offs rather than sort of wish them away. So we identified 5 guiding principles for age assurance, and I'm going to go through each of these in turn. One thing I want to say before I do is that we wanted to really ground these principles for age assurance within that overarching framework of commitments to trust and safety that I presented earlier. And in some cases, these things line up naturally. So when identifying and evaluating and adjusting for risks to youth as part of safety by design, that really sort of flows from our overarching commitment to trust and safety in product development. Likewise, layered enforcement operations fits within our enforcement commitment and transparency within our transparency commitment. But we realized that there were these other issues that are incredibly important when it comes to age assurance that are cross-cutting. And so things like accounting for user privacy or ensuring inclusive and accessible approaches, those are things that I think can be dealt with through practices that span our full range of commitments from product development all the way to transparency. So identifying, evaluating, and adjusting for risks when it comes to proportionate age assurance methods. This is that risk assessment piece, and I think a couple practices that I wanted to highlight here is, of course, identifying and categorizing risks and doing risk assessment using the sort of 4 C's: content, conduct, contact, and commercial risks to youth, making sure that that specialized expertise is there, involving youth and families themselves as part of risk assessment, and including experts in young people as part of both kind of pre-launch assessment and post-launch evaluation of products and features that include some element of age assurance. Second, accounting for risks to user privacy. Again, this is really an issue that needs to be addressed across that full product development lifecycle, from product development all the way through transparency. But here, and as the number of practices we identified grows for some of these practices, the text size gets smaller, so apologies for that. But did want to flag one, keeping data as much as possible on a user's device and off of servers, whether it's of the service, the relying party, or the provider of an age assurance solution. Using data protection impact assessments to inform how one implements age assurance. And of course, developing interoperable age assurance solutions so that people can provide less data to fewer services as part of going through these processes. Third is the area of inclusivity, accessibility, and equitability. And again, this is something that really spans the whole life cycle. But here I wanted to flag just a couple of examples of options, including, of course, providing options beyond government-issued ID when it comes to document verification, offering some sort of appeals mechanism so that when an age estimation test is failed, that there's some way to appeal that for the user. And then again, undertaking an impact analysis prior to deploying any given age estimation technologies in particular to account for those potential risks in terms of accessibility and equity. Fourth is this concept of conducting layered enforcement operations. And here I think it's important, so it's not just within an age assurance provider where you're going to have multiple methods of providing assurance and gaining confidence, but also for digital services that are incorporating age assurance into what they provide, having these layered set of operations that are more proportionate and risk-based. So here I think, we've a lot of examples of practices, but things to flag. Of course, working with distribution platforms who can provide some level of assurance that then can be used by others. Deploying additional age checks in different situations. For example, when someone's age changes from under 18 to over 18 or other sort of key threshold ages. And then allowing users to report other users who might be misreporting their ages. So just a couple examples of a lot of different practices for enforcement that our partners flagged as part of this process. And then last but certainly not least is transparency. And here, it's really about not just deploying effective age assurance approaches, but that ensuring that users understand what these methods are and how they're being used and how their data is being used, not just for compliance with data protection, but I think really this is about a sort of broader social license to operate digital products and services with these kinds of age restrictions and age controls in place so that people understand it and you get the trust that is necessary along with that safety. So here I wanted to flag, of course, explaining why age data is being collected at account signup and what that means. Exploring open source implementations of age assurance as a potential method that could be used where the code and approaches are accessible to researchers and experts. And then Developing, of course, resources like Help Center articles that explain how a service is working with age assurance providers so that users understand all of this. So really, in closing, I just want to say there's really, we say it all the time, but I think it just bears repeating that there is no one-size-fits-all solution here. Different products and services are facing different risks, and we need to enable a range of solutions in order to really make age-appropriate experiences work online. And this really needs to be grounded in that broader framework of trust and safety that I presented earlier. So as part of what we're doing going forward, I think our view was that the collective viewpoint of our members was something that would be worth sharing, not just sort of generally with stakeholders, but also as part of the development of international standards in this space. It's why our partnership has become a liaison to the ISO Working Group 5 that is meeting in this very building, working on age assurance standards. And I think in particular, we believe that our principles and practices can be a helpful resource for organizations, whether it's relying parties or age assurance providers, in terms of developing the practice statements that are foundational to the age assurance standards that are underway. So we're looking forward to continuing to work on that as we continue this conversation. So in closing, I think last month I had the pleasure of joining a convening at Stanford University on kids' online health and safety that was put together as part of the U.S. Biden-Harris administration's task force on kids' online health and safety. And we spent an incredible day with experts talking about all different issues when it comes to youth online. But that conversation was grounded in and centered around the perspectives of an incredible group of young people who are themselves, kind of leading efforts in the United States to sort of define responsible approaches to these challenging issues. And the key word that they used again and again and again, which was then taken up by the policymakers and industry experts and that were in this conversation, was nuance. That we need nuanced solutions to these very challenging problems, but that the nuance can't get in the way of the urgency of these issues. So I think we need to figure out how we can move forward quickly, but carefully. And I think ultimately what we're talking about here when it comes to why we need age assurance as part of delivering age-appropriate experiences is about societal challenges that are complicated by technology, not technological challenges that are complicated by society. And that's why I think, hopefully this is one piece of the puzzle when it comes more forward to moving forward with nuance and not trying to technology our way out of a scientific problem by nerding harder. So with that, thanks very much and happy to take questions if there's time. I think there's...
First of all, great that you listen to youth. I'm very happy to hear that, so that's perfect. I guess all your age assurance methods are based on consent. But then the question is consent also revocable? Is there a thought on that?
I mean, that's something that I think did come up in the conversations around developing these practices, but it's not something where we, I think, came to any sort of conclusion that we otherwise would have put into the paper. But I think it's a great question and one we'll be taking back to our members and raising as we continue these conversations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
At the very back.
Thanks for the presentation, David. My name is Mashiro Bologa from South Africa. I just want to know your thinking around privacy versus, especially with regard to children protection. And I'm asking that question from a regulatory point of view because, or any enforcement point of view, the discussion that we had, I think since Monday, is that once the age has been verified, the data mustn't be stored. And for us as regulators, always the need to check whether there are people that tried to, to default or bypass the system. And we always, I think, want the operators to produce reports. So I don't know whether you, maybe together with your members, have you ever reflected on that, the need to preserve, I would say, evidence, whether for prosecution or for enforcement? Whether have you thought about it?
I think we recognize that there are, significant challenges here in this space, and I think it's really important that this conference in particular is bringing together folks like yourself on the regulator side when it comes to content, as well as data protection authorities from different countries that are thinking actively about these issues, because I think we need to have that joined up conversation in order to get to sort of some consensus answers here. And I think it's also important that the standards under development have both privacy and security elements to them as being core, because we need to sort of think about all of these things together rather than in isolation.
Judy.
Thank you so much, David. And it's tremendous to hear of the work of this group, the liaison with the standards body, and hopefully also with EU Consent 2.0. I think there's 3 areas that I think are really crucial to pick up on. And I think there's still a few areas that would be really good to table during this next period. So one, picking up on the NIST session yesterday, if you look a decade ago, people said, you can't check age at 18, and that's obviously clearly been proven wrong. And the next watershed that NIST alluded to was the 13 area. And there I think there is still quite a sort of a difference in practice. Pretty much self-declaration at 18 across the board for goods that are illegal has been, pretty much from all the different parties in the room. And I think the journey over this next period, and that is complicated by the actual knowledge element in the US, but I think that is a really interesting area. And it was quite significant that NIST picked up on. Historically, the sort of the focus has been on 18, but actually there's so many regulations around the world that are looking at what are in the terms of service of organizations, and what are the risks, and how do you deal age appropriately with that teens area. So I just wondered, are there a set of things that this group is looking at for the next year? And are some of those knotty topics within that?
It's a great question. And I think we're in the, now that we've produced this report and been sharing this report and facilitating these kind of workshops, we'll be doing this more in the future, including at TrustCon, the Trust and Safety Professional Association conference happening in San Francisco in July, where we'll be running a workshop on exactly this sort of thing. So I think we'll take it to those spaces and see, but I think our approach is to try to keep these conversations within that broader framework that I mentioned, and then provide opportunities to drill down and get increasingly granular about, sort of where there's consensus, and to build out recommendations. And so it may be that there's interest in taking that forward, and would welcome the chance to work with you guys on that.
Thank you very much, David. We're up against time. I said to David last night he made a much better career decision than I, because he runs a trade association for lots of very, very profitable global businesses, and I run for the non-profitable Trade Association of Age Verification Providers. But it's great to have that contribution, so thank you very much.
Thank you.